Please help me welcome Alexander Tochilovsky.
What I'd like to discuss is this notion of design history and the way it might and should perhaps connect to contemporary design practice. We tend to, as designers, we kind of get exposed to design history as from the framework of scholarship, I would say. It's sort of rooted in this connection to teaching history. And it's something that we kind of have to, it always feels like we have to do it. That's part of the curriculum. And it's presented in a particularly specific way that has to do with the fact that it's history. You kind of have to cover a whole deal of territory in usually one semester. And it can seem kind of daunting and can kind of seem a little bit boring. There is a great deal of design history textbooks or books that could be used as textbooks. This is just a few. These are sort of like the main ones. But they're difficult. They're difficult to put together. They're difficult to read. They're difficult. I mean, I'm not knocking them in any regard because it's an insanely difficult thing to put together. But it's really hard to. How do you talk about the history of graphic design? I mean, you have to really create an immense volume of stuff. So you end up being very selective because you have to like put some things and not others, and it becomes fairly shallow, and it sort of requires further investigation on the reader or kind of on the user part, I guess. And there's also certain things that come to light when you kind of interact with these. So that's a screenshot on the right. That's the full page on the left. Those are comments to one of the design history textbooks. This is Paul Shaw's blog. And he's, he calls it blue pencil. Very, like, he goes through, like, typos, like a small thing like a typo to bigger factual inconsistencies. So this is his review of one of the design history textbooks that clearly has gone through years of work and editing and writing, and yet, there's these things. So, again, it's a very difficult and unenvious job of putting this together, but it's hard to be exact. It's hard to be precise. And I often find, like, in terms of visual culture, we as designers kind of get it from TV shows like Mad Men. So there's Peg Ilson and Helvetica, and Roger Sterling and the wonderful Seymour Quast poster hanging in his office. So that's where we kind of find information because it's more interesting, it's more entertaining, and of course the internet. When we as designers approach visual research, which we end up doing quite a bit, most projects involve some sort of visual research, where do you go? You go online. It's kind of a given. Obviously, that's at your disposal. It's in your phone. It's in your pocket. It's constantly sort of at the ready. So what ends up happening is you end up searching certain things like 1950s design, and you get stuff like this. You get whatever Google thinks is interesting and relevant for you. And as designers, I know myself, I'm always looking for sort of like the more obscure stuff, sort of the more interesting, the more nuanced stuff, but that's not how Google is designed to serve you material. It's giving you the things that everyone else thinks is connected to this thing. So you get the popular results. And so you end up looking at the same things that everyone else is looking. So it's really difficult to find and like get sort of more nuanced stuff. Swiss design, how much of this is actually Swiss? Probably less than half. It's like new stuff that is made in the Swiss style. So how do you tell it apart? Google can't parse it. It's just, whatever the connections are, that's what the algorithms are. It serves that stuff. So I want to give a little bit of a kind of a case study. Since I am the curator of the Herb Lubalin Study Center, it's interesting. If we look at someone like Herb Lubalin, if you do an image search for Herb Lubalin, this is what you get. And it feels like the stuff kind of breaks down into two kind of categories for me. And that's where I find a little bit of an issue, having sort of the privilege to be exposed to most of his material. I find that his work tends to break down, especially when you go by Google, into two categories. The other thing also is not everything here is his. So again, how do you know? How do you tell it apart? So the two things that I find are the two things that are pretty popular for the last few years, almost a decade perhaps. Lettering is a very, very expressive kind of use of lettering throughout his work, which then leads to things like this, right? So the way that work is being used, the way that things are popular, that's one of the things that people tend to gravitate towards. You know, it's like Lubalin is this, or this. The avant-garde, the typeface, the lockup, and everything sort of that flows out of that. God knows there's millions of stuff like this that's been made. So in a funny way, it's like these two things, and on a sort of more kind of structural level, I should say, I guess, both of those things, the lettering, the very expressive kind of Spencerian lettering, and the avant-garde typeface were not his. He never did lettering in the studio. Like, he didn't need to. He was not skilled enough to do it, but he had amazing, amazing, amazing people working with him, for him, initially for him, and then with him. They became business partners. So Tom Carnese, in most cases, did both the Spencerian stuff and the full drawing of the avant-garde typeface. It's art directed by Lubalin. Both things had his fingerprints on it, but the actual physical labor is not his. So again, so what do we know? We know very little, and it's kind of perpetuating sort of these things. And then the other thing that once you start looking at websites, and this is one of the big kind of top hits that comes up if you just search for a biography of Herb Lubalin. The bottom right piece, that's not by him at all. It's a student project that got filtered in. Neither are these two that are circled. So you find a bio, it seems legible, it seems credible, right, convincing. Like, one is Swiss from 1960s, the other one is Marion Benches from a little bit more recent times. It's in the aesthetic, so how do you tell it apart? How do you parse the stuff? It's kind of a mess out there. So my philosophy, or sort of my interest, lies in trying to figure out how can we connect it a little bit more beyond just the surface, right? The issue with the internet and the visual research that you do there, you end up just kind of looking at the surface. And how much mileage are you going to get as a graphic designer from the surface level? So I always ask this question. I always ask this question of visitors that come to the archive. When you're designing something, are you ever consciously thinking about other designers that came before you? Like, is it something that's at the foreground of your mind? It's somewhere in the back, right? Because it's something that we do. We learn the timeline. We know what the 50s were like. We know what the 60s were like. So it's somewhere rooted in your space, and you're thinking about design, but you're thinking about design that you're making now. You're making new things. You're making things that are moving forward. So why should you be thinking, right, like in your actual sort of space of the workspace that you're doing, about Herb Lubalin, perhaps, or Paul Rand? Like, is it ever reasonable to even consider that? The natural sort of inclination is no. Like, why would you actually actively think about this work and these individuals when you're making things? Because you're making your thing, and you're making it, with an eye towards the future. But I actually think that we can, and I think if we analyze the work in a very different way, historical design work, we can be conscious of it, and we can internalize some of these things and actually use them in our own work. So I'd like to break it down and kind of go through a couple of people and quite a few pieces of their work, just to give you an insight into what I think is really interesting and really relevant in a way that can be active in the way that you think about your own work. Herb Lubalin, this is not his, but the context of his work is American advertising. So he started working in late 1930s. He graduated college in 1939, worked for the World's Fair, asked for a raise, was fired, and then went on to do other things. He landed at a studio called Sudler and Hennessy, doing pharmaceutical design mostly. So two pieces here. One is from the late 30s. On the left, the PBR ad is from the 30s, and the ad on the right is a typical pharmaceutical ad from early 50s. This is the context. Most American advertising looks like this, with very, very few deviations. And in terms of typography, and that's kind of the crux of everything, the typographic choices are made by art directors after the copy has been set So the copywriters are usually the first line of defense and kind of in strategy thinking, because advertising is messaging. You figure out what the message is, the copy is written, it's given to the art directors. The art directors then physically kind of assemble the advertisements. So typographically, they're thinking about type choices, type size, and placement. Right? It's those three main things that we still do. Like when you're thinking about typography, you have to figure out what typeface you're using, what size, and where it's going to go, because it's language, right? You're putting forward language, and you have to figure out what shape it's going to take. There's a certain kind of structure that this creates, a construction for these things that stays pretty bland, pretty consistently boring, especially after you see it over and over. How much kind of oomph can you get from an image? So Lubalin understood that there's probably potentially a much better way of doing this. So this is his solution from 1955 to the things that he was seeing that weren't working within advertising. And what he saw is sort of the core of the issues were this like unnecessary kind of over-decoration in a way that the image might be kind of standing in the way. He saw the potential for just focusing on the typography. So this ad functions purely on those three things: typeface, type size, and placement. Right? So if you take any of those things away, there is no ad. There's no way to interact with this thing. Right? He's creating pathways into the message, right? The core. Like, who cares about any of that stuff? The image, like, if you're not into it, you're not into it. You're not actually even going to bother to read the stuff. There's nothing you can do here other than read it. And in an interesting way, I mean, it's not profound for us because we've been around this kind of stuff, but he's creating two ways that you're reading the ad. He's making you read it twice. You read the headline, which is sort of embedded in the copy, and then you go back and you want to see if it works when you read the two words together, the white type and the red type. So it's not a huge amount of copy to read, but he's sort of played a trick, made you curious to read it twice. So how many people would actively read this? Probably very few. Most people would engage with this on two levels, and you get the core messaging twice. So it's sort of to illustrate this idea for me. It doesn't really matter what this looks like in the end, right? If we can take the surface out of the equation, which is kind of bizarre to say in the graphic design context, but if we can, at least for a moment, kind of focus away from what the things look like and what they stand for and how they function, those are, I think, in essential, invaluable lessons to take away as graphic designers. This sets up a system. These are two other ads for the same client. The copywriting is now done hand in hand with the art directors, not separately. So it's a very different process that he's creating within advertising and medical advertising too. This was new. This was completely new. This stuff was not really explored, definitely not in advertising. And to kind of give another kind of layer of context, it took him 16 years to get here, right? 16 years of working in graphic design, 9 years of working in the studio as an art director, to get to a place where things started to make sense, that you saw some potential for it. Not Lubalin, but this is early 50s, again, another medical advertisement. This is for Bentel. This is his solution, right? Remarkably different, much better. Conceptually, a different way of thinking about typography. This is one thing that I think helps today for us to sort of understand the potential, the power of typography, is that you have to, as a graphic designer, kind of actively force yourself to stop reading text. Right? If we keep reading text, we're always going to see it as text, as language. What Lubalin is doing is he's focusing on the shapes. Text is, if you deal with typefaces, they're shapes, they're abstractions. So an ad like this couldn't exist without the notion of that the letter S is, besides for it being a letter S, it stands for language, it's also a curve. It's a zigzag, kind of like a shape that the slinky, in this case, could take on. So an ad like this, a concept like this, couldn't exist without thinking of shapes first, right? And then combining that with language. It's a whole new avenue of thinking. And I think to do good typography, it's important for us to switch the reading part of the brain. We kind of are doing it intuitively, But I think if you do it actively, you can get much better solutions. And that's, that's not happening here, right? Language is language. You have to kind of fit it somewhere. This is a completely new way of thinking. Shapes and sort of a much, much better and much greater appreciation for what these things look like, how they function, and what the potential is. Another amazing ad, one of the things that he's really famous for, Let's Talk Type, Let Type Talk. An ad where, again, like beyond the physical, the graphic kind of impact that this has, it's an interesting example of him being aware of that you can get an audience or kind of the reader to behave a certain way. You can get them to read the ad a certain way. So in this sort of dense construction, he's making you read the ad a few times. We're looking at it at a slightly distorted scale. Imagine it's, magazine size, it's in your lap. It's big, and you kind of have to slow down to really deconstruct it to read what the ad is saying. And to do that, he's doing lettering, or he's commissioning lettering from his lettering artist. It's this really beautiful, justified block of copy, but it's dense. It's this picket fence that makes it very difficult to read at glance. So he's manipulating you into reading it, slowing down, and interacting with something in the way that he wants it to interact. Not just, here I have this amazing copy, I'm just going to put it out there, you should see how wonderful this is. He's making you behave a certain way. He's making you read this a couple of times over. He's making you work for it. You have a reward sort of in the end. And you can see in the small copy how that message is sort of reinforced, but it's doing what it's saying. It's letting type do the talking. And so this is incredibly skillful lettering artist. John Pistilli did the lettering here, famous for the typeface Pistilli Roman. That's very much kind of in the style of this. But he's rendering this, because if you use a typeface, the two words type and talk would not align. You have just a different proportion, right? Like you have two narrow letters in type and one narrow letter in talk. So if you stack them in any font, one of them is going to be off. So it's going to be a little wonky. And look at the way the P, L, and P line up. Perfect. It's perfectly positioned. This is a lot of stuff to ask of a lettering artist to do. But he needs it to be exactly dead on. And that's the genius of Lubalin. You've seen this, yes? Lots of us have seen this. It's the sixth image that comes up when you do Google image search for the two words Herb Lubalin, right? So according to Google algorithms, that's a very safe bet that that's Lubalin. It's not Lubalin. It's from his studio. It's from the last iteration of the studio. Actually, the second to last iteration of the studio. He had a habit of making partners from his employees and renaming the studio with their names. So they would become full partners and the studio would change. This is when the studio is called Lubalin, Smith, Carnegie, and Pekulik. Alan Pekulik did this piece from start to finish. Lubalin had zero input into this. I mean, he saw it. He probably said it's great. But Alan was brought in, years before this because he could do this kind of stuff. He was brought in because he could think in the way that Lubalin thought, in this sort of aesthetic, and he could letter as well. So he could do both things. He could design, conceive of ideas, and also do the lettering. So he did the lettering in this piece. So it's one of the most popular pieces that are connected to Lubalin. It's not his at all. So again, like Google says it is, it's really not, and it's almost impossible to. Well, that's not true. If you find the images a certain way, this Beard's image, there's only one place that there is correct kind of captions connected to it. So what we know is not really that deep. But I want to bring a few of his other pieces into focus that I think, to me, say more about Lubalin as an art director and Lubalin as an individual in a way that we don't really think about today, or historically in the context of design history. We're just not giving that information readily, unfortunately. So by 1962, Herb Lubalin is working as an art director at Sudler and Hennessy. In late 50s, he is elevated to the status of creative director when the studio becomes a full ad agency. So they decide to kind of take on a bigger role. And instead of just servicing ad companies, they're actually becoming an ad company. because they had an amazing creative team with Lubalin, so they made a creative division, and that division was called Lubalin and Lubalin. So he got his name on the door, he got big profits from the agency. He had a very, very good team around him that took him years to assemble. So as an art director in the 60s, in the 50s, you've basically made it. This is as high as you're going to get. I mean, creative direction in the graphic design, that's pretty much the peak. It's still, I still think that's as high as you're going to get. He grew up through the Great Depression. This is it. In a funny way, what's interesting to me is in 1962, Lubalin was willing to just throw everything away. Right? You work so hard to get to that place. In 1962, he's basically saying, it's okay, but there's more potentially. So this is what happens. In 1962, he has a meeting with Ralph Ginzburg. Ralph Ginzburg was an interesting character, a very colorful, important individual in the history of America. In 1962, he had a very harebrained idea of starting an erotic magazine in essentially the midst of one of the most intense periods of American censorship. And he was reacting to a Supreme Court decision about obscenity, defining obscenity. And one of the sort of one of the points within the definition of obscenity, according to the U.S. government, was artwork essentially was exempt from being obscene. So he had then this amazing idea to make a magazine that would only be sent through the mail, through the censor channels, which would be erotic in content, but it would be a work of art, like in his definition of a work of art. And that's the brief, essentially, that he came to Lubalin with and said, this is the thing I want to do. And Lubalin said, that's pretty interesting, that's a pretty ballsy thing to do. Let me think about it. So he thought about it for a day, and he called him back, and he said, I'll do it on one condition. And one condition is I get complete creative control. Right? So you have to let me do all of the design, and you have basically no input or no overriding factors. If I say we're doing this, we're doing this. Somehow, magically, Ginzburg agreed to that. And this is what they came together with. It was a beautiful magazine. It was hardcover. It was sent out only in the mail because Ginzburg wanted to prove that in 1962, you can have erotic content go through the desk, essentially, of the censor, which was physically built into the U.S. Postal Service. They would look at packages and open stuff and read and look for things, actively look for bad things, mostly text. Tropic of Cancer was a banned book. A lot of James Joyce, very deep list. Eros was attempting to not circumvent, but actually pass through. It's not like they were trying to sneak it. They were like, it's going to be looked at, and they're going to see it's okay, and they're going to not have anything. They're not going to be able to do anything, and Ginzburg would have the last laugh. John Pistilli did the wonderful lettering there, and it's an amazing, amazing, amazing artifact that is unfortunately not well known in the context of Herb Lubalin's work. And it's unfortunate. It should be. His art direction and his sensibilities are insanely fine-tuned and really, really sing, because this is what he was dying to do. He was being pulled more into advertising in a way that he was very uncomfortable with. He said there's a couple of things that Lubalin was not so well known, unfortunately, at this point, but he said, I don't like advertising because it makes people buy stuff that they don't need. And he was saying this in the 60s. It's not like he's saying that, and when he's retired in the 80s. He said this in the midst of working within advertising. He just had a very difficult relationship to it. He also was very critical of American advertising in the 50s. He found it very sexist. He found it very racist. Find other art directors in the 60s who would talk about sexism rampant in American advertising. There are almost none. To the point where he actually participated in design conferences and was on a panel against other advertising executives and telling them that their work is sexist. Again, good luck finding that in history books. It's not. It's really not. It's an anomaly for sure. He had very strong convictions, but he also loved design. He just loved the nuts and bolts of graphic design. And this project was that for him, just pure love of graphic design. And he exercised that complete control that he got from Ginzburg. This is a very rare set of photographs by Gary Winogrand. It's only published in the first issue of Eros magazine. And I love this spread. It's this really beautiful composition that Lubalin is creating using imagery. It's heavily cropped in the way that Winogrand probably would have been very unhappy with. But he's just juxtaposing these really beautiful set of images. But look at the structure and the construction of the way the right page is set up. On the left page, you have this very strong central figure in the foreground, or a couple, actually. When you see the legs, you realize that it's a couple. But they kind of divide the page in half. There's this core. If you look at the right page, there are three couples kissing, and the couples are lined up down the middle, which echoes the design, essentially, of the left head image. And there's also like an interesting play. We don't know what's going on in the image on the left. So it's a couple, we know that, but we can't see what they're doing. Lubalin's showing us three couples who are openly kissing. So you kind of go back and you look at the left page to see, like, can I tell? So he's clearly kind of keeping you interested in this. That's his job as an art director. Here's content. I need to make the reader as interested in this content as I am, or maybe even more than I could be. So his job is just to get you to spend as much time with this content, and he's doing everything possibly can. These were incredibly expensive to make. They cost a fortune, all of Ginsberg's money. And each issue used between 4 and 5 different paper stocks. Right? That's just throwing money. But every time he switches stock, it's with intent. He has a reason why the signatures switch. He's trying to say something. It's the end of that feature, Winogrand's photographs, and the paper switches to kind of this off-white textured stock because it has illustrations by Degas, and he's trying to kind of mimic the paper that the original illustrations are in. The second issue is probably, to me, one of my favorite of the Eros magazines. The cover and the back cover, really beautiful, very simple. Just this. It's the summer of '62, so the magazine is quarterly, and he uses these beautiful, beautiful opening images in the end papers. Same photographer, same series, and he does this image in the closing end paper. When you look at them together, you can kind of get a sense of maybe what Lubalin is going for. So Lubalin was colorblind, not completely colorblind. He was also ambidextrous, but he had definitely like a difficulty with certain colors. So I think color for him was always a conceptual conceit. Like, it's something that you could use to make it do something. So if you look at these two, and you can conceptualize the notion of Herb Lubalin as an art director is to make you spend a lot of time with the magazine. He's kind of trying to, I think, elicit that feeling from these. So if you look from the front cover to the back cover, include the end paper, so you start with a day, kind of a hot summer day. It's accentuated by that red opening. And then as you go slowly through the content, you get to a more evening, kind of dusk blue, and the back image feels more nighttime. Right? It's just a higher contrast image that's picked on there. But there's a passage of time. So like from the front to the back of the book, there's something happening. It's not just nice image, nice image. He's thinking about these things. Even if you don't see it, the care and sort of the attention and the love that's put into the magazine comes through. It's just like that very simple thing. And the opening in this article, in this magazine, is one of the most scariest things that you could do in 1960s. And this is something that Lubalin was very well aware of, what he was undertaking. That's why I said this is not a very simple proposition to just like, hey, it sounds cool, I just want creative control and we'd be fine. This is scary. This is an article called We All Love Jack. Jack being Kennedy, right? Also, you don't really call JFK Jack. You would call him John, if anything. Jack is a very, very, very informal way of calling someone, especially the president. But the entire article is on the right-hand side. The column of text, that's the entire article. It talks about Kennedy being attractive, right? Eros magazine, article on Kennedy, like the connection is very obvious. This is 1960s, 1962. Kennedy is known, Kennedy is respected and admired, and people know that he's attractive, but you don't actually go out and say that, or you don't really say that in print. Sex and presidency is not necessarily the same thing. You don't really want to make that connection in the 60s. Ginsberg was so okay with that. and very interested. With him, you could always tell in every issue, whatever the first article is the thing that he's dying to say. It's like he knows it's like the button-pushing article. It's always in the front. So this is Lubalin's design for it. The entire article is made up of news agency photographs of Kennedy with women, mostly. There's a few stray men here and there. They just went through the wire images, stuff that was available for any magazine, any newspaper, and just selectively picked out the things that were interesting to them, like this image. I don't know if some of you recognize, but that's Grace Kelly, who had a relationship with Kennedy before Jackie, that Jackie knew very well, that there was this. Yeah, it just says it all. That's the actual photograph, so they just cropped out the other participants in this particular event. It's a state function, it's a state luncheon, which was a luncheon instead of a state dinner because Jackie told Kennedy that there's no way this is going to be a big dinner with her. It's like, we're going to make this as short and as painless for me as possible. So they were like, had a luncheon, you could tell how uncomfortable Jackie is with all of that. But they just cropped it. And the last page in this article is Jackie, so she's not in any of the other photographs. So again, very intentional. Full bleed image, you fold the page, you turn the page, and you have Kennedy on the right, and the female protagonist is on the left. There's a very intentional play, Jackie or Grace or anyone. It's so obvious, but there's nothing that they're saying. There's no text. It's just you are thinking that. We didn't say anything. We just let the images kind of do the talking. And that's the genius of understanding the content. Lubalin knew pitch perfect what you need to do as an art director. For someone who made a living by this point and was so well known for his typographic work to just do this thing and just kind of leave it. It's also printed on this off-white stock with a slightly coarser halftone grid that you would normally see on this kind of paper. It's thick, it's not real newsprint. But he's making you believe it because we were conditioned to see imagery like this as news and as truth. Well, maybe not anymore, but that's the notion, that we had that. So he's pushing that as an art director, saying, think of this and see this and connect it to reality, because this is reality. They didn't do anything except for maybe just small cropping. The third issue had the last photographs of Marilyn Monroe, the photos that were taken 6 weeks before she died. This is sort of where the magazine gets a little bit more revealing to this. Before the first couple issues didn't have anything other than like really thoughtful, really interesting articles about sex and love. And this is the very, very famous and fairly rarely seen set of photographs by Bert Stern. What's amazing in these images, in this set of images of this portfolio of images, there were over 2,000 photographs taken in 3 days with Marilyn. They included the images that have these crossed off marks, and usually like these marks are by the photographers. In this case, all of the marks are by Marilyn herself. She had the first pass at the images and picked out the ones that she didn't like or want, or like she just she could. It's Marilyn. So by running them, about 6 weeks, a little bit more than 6 weeks, but fairly close to her death, with these marks, the images start to tell a very, very different story. I mean, that's a profound image just by itself. Again, an art director that knows where just to hold back and just to kind of let something come through. The fourth issue was the winter of '62. The big story was Love in the Bible. That's the first article talking about the Bible, like highlighting all these interesting things that are in the Bible. But the big thing that caused a little bit of a lot of commotion was this article called Black and White and Color. It's a photographic, it's called A Tone Poem by Ralph Hattersley Jr. It's an interracial couple. And in 1962, this was unfortunately so far beyond the norm of what people could accept. Starting at the very, very top. Segregation in 1962 is like still a very big thing. Civil rights movement hasn't gained the traction that it eventually will. It's 62, you have to remember, not the 60s. It's 62, it's not just beginning of 62. These kinds of images were completely, unfortunately, societally unacceptable. Even to the people who the fans of this magazine, the people that subscribe to the magazine, were sex is cool, like we should talk about sex, but then if you bring in race into it, it's like, whoa, let's not go that far. Again, 60s, very different mindset. The racism that was so ingrained and still is, was so profoundly deep-seated that it took a lot for this. But you might recognize the image from the Spike Lee used sort of that exact framing. They're almost identical in the promotion for Jungle Fever, the movie that he made in 1991. Spike Lee knows his design history. He knows like all these little bits and pieces that he references very, very intentionally with a lot of respect. So what happened is this person steps in. That's Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy is the General Attorney of the United States. Robert Kennedy has had enough of this magazine that went from 25,000 subscribers to 75,000 subscribers, which freaked the crap out of them. This is a magazine that's not getting smaller, it's getting bigger and it's getting louder and bolder and in ways that is completely unacceptable to them. So Robert Kennedy, being the General Attorney of the United States, crafts a criminal case against Ginsburg. In the Christmas party of 1962, they're served with, he's indicted on 20 counts. He's served with his indictment, 20 criminal counts, which hadn't really been used against anyone before. They just hated this guy. They hated everything he stood for, and they wanted to find a way to shut him down. And they found an amazingly, profoundly evil and smart case against him. Kennedy crafted the case, which was clearly a bit of a payback for the article on his brother. You don't just drop something like that and walk away and say, hey, no big deal, we just did this thing about the president. This is how it worked back then. Like, this is a very simple, if it died its own slow death, the magazine, no big deal, but it didn't. So they stepped in. He's indicted and he's tried in Philadelphia in like a 2-week trial, and he's convicted and given 5 years in prison. Essentially for not much. I mean, and then the crux of it was the fact that he tried to make the magazine seem pornographic, which it wasn't, but he made people believe that they were buying pornography. And on the basis of that is how they convicted him. Not what was in the magazine, but what people thought might be in the magazine. And that was, at that time, the crime, essentially. 1962, 63 to be exact. But Ginsburg was not going to go quietly. He creates another magazine. So less than 6 months after he's convicted, he has another magazine on the newsstand, Fact magazine. Lubalin is now not working at Southern Hennessy. He left. He got a very small fee for Eros. This is a project he's doing completely for free. He felt responsible. He felt guilty for Ginsburg having to be convicted and potentially face prison, a lengthy 5 years in prison. That's for publishing. That's a lot. So he felt complicit in it, and he wanted to help. But this is also something I believed and understood, that this is an important thing. As a graphic designer, especially like a very talented graphic designer, you have a voice, and you could use that for certain things, which, he couldn't change the sexism in advertising. This is something he could change. This is something he could have a voice in and have a brilliant sort of understanding. There was no budget for this magazine. He figured out the simplest way of making this, actually physically making this magazine, was set in Times Roman, 2 columns. It was like the most efficient, bare bones kind of magazine, because he understood it's not about being flashy, it's about like really hard-hitting things. Type-only covers, because that's the point. It's the messaging of this, the attitude of this magazine is right on the front. And he did something really profoundly interesting. He sets up the formula. So the magazine is called Fact. He adds the colon to the name, the logo, because it creates a system. Every cover follows that structure. Fact, colon, blank. Just write the headline, write the message. It makes a much bigger impact, because you're reading something, rather than as a headline, you're reading it as a factual statement. Right? And you still have to read the article, and you still have to feel, that they have to convince you, but you start with that notion. Fact magazine says this is a fact, right? Yeah. This is the person who just convicted him, less than a year, for publishing, right? Ginsburg was not afraid. They went after Coca-Cola. In 1964, Coca-Cola was Lubalin's client. Right? So, go figure. They designed the Sprite packaging. When Sprite was launched in that year, they designed the original Sprite packaging. And Lubalin never talked about that project. It's almost like it never happened. It didn't work out so well. I think it was managed by Koch mostly, and so I think he walked away feeling like it's okay to do this. But it's a client. That's not his statement. But he knows the best way to position this. And this was a cover that ran towards the tail end of the first year. This magazine ran for 3 years. 64 election, the famous 64 election, Lyndon Johnson versus Barry Goldwater. Mirrored a little bit this election. Unfortunately, had a very different outcome. Goldwater was trounced by LBJ, went and sulked for a couple of years, and then remembered, oh yeah, those guys said some bad things about me, so I'm going to sue them. He sued the magazine for libel. He was in classic American style. He was seeking $1 million. He won his case because as they proved in court, Ginsburg, being a really good editor, altered some of the letters from the psychiatrist to make them a little bit punchier in language, because that's his job as an editor. Obviously not correct, not ethical. So he lost the case, but Goldwater got $1. That was the court's decision. Not $1 million, but $1, plus damages. So Ginsburg had to pay his lawyer, which was way more than the budget for this magazine. So he just moved on. There's Mr. Barry Goldwater. And he made another magazine, less than 6 months. So Fact folded in 67. By 68, he had Avant-Garde. And this is the magazine that sort of is better known within the context of Lubalin's work. It's the magazine that inspired the typeface. But for the people that own this issue, do take a look inside. This is something that's very, very important to me in the context of everything I'm saying. Graphic design leaves an indelible imprint on visual culture. Right? We can look at graphic design for graphic design, but we can also acknowledge and embrace the notion that this is visual culture. So if you look at the first issue of Avant-Garde, you will find this article called Drawings by Muhammad Ali. So most of us here, I would say 100% of us know who Muhammad Ali was. How many of you have ever seen or heard of Drawings by Muhammad Ali? Any hands? This is in here. This happened. This was commissioned by the magazine, if you can call it that. They flew out to Chicago, met with him, and begged and pleaded with him to make drawings. They knew he made drawings. They convinced him reluctantly to make drawings, and he annotated every drawing. So as you go through the magazine, you'll find amazing insight. This is a very difficult time in Ali's history. This is when he was convicted for dodging the draft. This is a very turbulent time in his career. And so they caught him, I think, in this vulnerable time where he said things through his drawings that he probably wouldn't be able to say outright. And if people didn't believe them, or if you don't believe me now, there are photographs in the corner of the magazine that show you him at the drawing table with the actual drawings in there. There's one on top right. He says people always ask him what he thinks about at the end of the fight, when it's the other boxers being counted out, and that's his answer. I'm going to the bank. I just want a big pile of cash. But there's other more serious things, like top left, it says Islam offers freedom, justice, equality. Past religions is offered in the small type in the thought bubble for the colored Negro, slavery, suffering, death, Christianity. This is a side of Ali that you would not ever find anywhere. And this is also the images that you will never find anywhere else. They're most likely lost. I don't think anyone really knows where they are. So to see this amazing aspect of American cultural history, you just have to acquire the first issue of Avant-Garde, which is fetching about $75. It's like, for $75 you can own this bit of American history. It's nothing. You should all have a copy of it. That's him in court when he was being convicted. It's incredible. I know people who own this magazine that don't know about this. They have the physical thing. Look through it. It's revealing. Ginsburg went to prison, wrote a book that Lubalin designed for him, and that ended sort of that process of publishing. He went away in 1972. It took about 10 years for the entire sort of legal system and all of the appeals to work their way out. So he couldn't get out of it. But he got 2 other magazines out that Lubalin designed completely for free for him. And again, like the risk that Lubalin was undertaking to do this is insane, right? You have to contextualize, like, it's not like he needed a big break, right? It's not like, hey, I'm like mid-level designer, I'm gonna take on a project that's gonna make my name be visible and I'm gonna get clients for it, I'm gonna take something that's really risky. He was voted Art Director of the Year in 1962, National Art Director of the Year. That's not like small change, that's like a serious accolade for a graphic designer. And at the same time, he's basically willingly throwing it all away. He didn't like where he was. He saw a different way. It's the 60s. You grin and bear it, right? Like, what do you mean you're not interested in this? Like, it's the industry. Like, who in advertising or in graphic design at the time was like willingly just, tossing it aside? Don Draper, maybe. But this is fantasy, right? This is reality. This is something he really believed in. And he saw a different path. And the work that he made after 64, when he started his own studio, is the work that we know of his. He started from zero. He started rebuilding his studio, left and started his own thing. But he was facing an insane amount of risk. How do you get clients on the back of an erotic magazine in 1960s? Right? How would you do that today? It's a very, very interesting thing that we don't really know. One of the design history books, the Meg's design history books, is the only book that I know that talks about Eros, fact, and avant-garde as being something that Lubalin was part of. Most of them, like avant-garde, like it's very thin. It's just not there, unfortunately. But if you'd like to own these, you can buy Eros magazine for as little as $3. $2.99 to be precise. $2.99. Yeah, it's that crazy, right? That's a screenshot of the full page of eBay. That's the number of lots of Eros magazine available at any given time. There's about 40 on average. So if I can wager, between 30 and 40 sets of Eros magazine at any given time on eBay. The more expensive ones are a couple of $100, but the cheaper ones, there you go, $4.99, $6, come on. Insane culture, right? The Winogrand issue, the first issue with Winogrand photographs, the photos are owned by Eros, although it's non-existent. It's never published with his work. He doesn't have the rights to them. So if you want to own a beautifully printed, rare set of Winogrand photographs, invest in $20, and you can have it in mint condition. It's unbelievable. So why is this not better known? It's just history, right? This is just the problem that we have with this stuff. And this is something I found literally today. This is a brand of cigarettes. It's not a joke. I didn't make this. This is real. In 1975, British-American tobacco company made cigarettes that were called Fact. So this is about 10 years after Fact magazine. They just ripped off the magazine. The same logo, like they tried to get the lettering to work. It's not as good.
The whole trick. That's the whole trick.
Yeah, but like we can't have nice things. 2, Karl Gerstner, amazing Swiss designer. 2 projects that I want to show you quickly. Capital magazine, that's a little harder to find these days, but it's a really beautiful magazine. He was the original art director for the magazine. If you guys are familiar with Twen magazine, it's like a much bigger kind of well-known German magazine. This is the same publisher. So he wanted to have a high-end business magazine for kind of the CEOs of Germany. The publisher is in Cologne. Karl is in Switzerland, but he's commissioned to design this. This is the first launch issue of Capital. The lettering on the front is, he explains, it's the same lettering as on the first edition Capital by Karl Marx. He's just found the same typeface and he's using that. So the magazine had no logo, no consistent logo, which is another thing. But this magazine is very well known for this, which is the grid, the typographic grid for this magazine, which in most cases just looks insane. Like, what is that? How would you even use this? It's not a grid that anyone is sort of like is familiar with. But this is it's kicked around. It's in magazines. It's been talked about. But what does it even mean? So it's actually dead simple. It starts with a micro typographic grid, the point size and leading, and then squared. So the grid is a square, and you start with like drawing the first grid, the macro grid, and then you start adding squares into it. So one column, like one big square, and then you have 2 columns of squares, 2 by 2, 3 by 3, 4 by 4, 5 by 5, and 6 by 6. Right, so you'll overlay all of those layers of grids, and then you have the final outcome. Why? He needed to have options of 1 column, 2 column, 3 column, 4 column, 5 column, and 6 column layouts. This is the way he could conceive of it. And he actually needed all 6. Karl Gerstner wouldn't do something if he didn't need to. If he was only happy and needed 5, he would have stopped at 5, but he needed 6, so he made 6. He needed the entire control of the project. And this is something that he was so thoughtful and so meticulous about, forward thinking. He anticipated every problem he could encounter in the future and would solve it beforehand. And this is essentially what you get. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 column layouts if you want to. And obviously every permutation. You have a 3-column image with 1 column and then another column that's like 2 columns. You can just mix and match this to no end. He needed that flexibility. So when he's using it, you can see the other small little detail there is the gap between the squares is always consistent. It's 2 lines of type. His gutter essentially between the columns, between the squares is always the same unit. So that's the white column is 2 lines of type. Vertical, horizontal, but that's the buffer. And this is how he's using it. The square only relates to everything below the hang line. So the square is like where the images end. Everything up top is free space, air. So with a very, very dense grid, he's building in air. Right? And that's the other thing, like whenever that grid is reproduced, it's shown as like, this is the square grid. The magazine was not square. It had about like 2.5 inches at the top, which was air. The design could have breathing room, built-in white space. The headlines could be as long as he needed them to be. They always had room. He didn't have to like work them into the layout underneath. And for just, I was curious, it's like questioning the master. I was curious, like, did he actually use the 6 column, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6? So if you pick up the first issue of Capital Magazine, he uses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 throughout the magazine. He was that meticulous. He actually needed and had them and used them, and it's pretty fluid. He could move through layouts and with a lot of ease, and you could do these very complicated layouts. You could do everything within this. The systematic kind of thinking of this is profound. This is 1962. This is something that you can take still. You can take pleasure in sort of this kind of thinking. All you have to do is just spend a little bit of time looking at this object. That's the close-up. Printed 2-color, silver and black over red paper, but allowing the red to crack, to break in the silver, creates these natural red lines. So simple. The detail in this magazine are profound. Like he's an incredible master, but everything conforms to the grid. See like how the lines going vertically? That's the same micro-typographic grid, just flipped on the side. And like I said, there's never a logo on the magazine. The logo, so the vision for the magazine, the branding kind of was the repeat of the word capital. On every cover it would be different, like a different system. Like that's something that we think of today kind of as a neat trick to do, but how could you have a magazine with no identifiable logo? It's just how. You just create a visual system. And he always had a reason, like when you open the magazine on the inside cover, he would explain why the cover looks the way it does. He always had an idea. He had always like there's something with the zigzag that like he talks about why that is, and it's different on the back. There's always a reason with him. A more contemporary example of the use of that, Il Magazine, designed or directed by Francesco Franchi, uses that same square grid. They sort of borrowed the Gerstner grid, even with the logo the way the logo fits into the master grid conforms to that square unit. So you can do it. Right? You can sort of leverage some of this stuff and still make it practical. This is the second project of Gerstner's that I want to show. So two completely opposite ends of the spectrum, like a magazine for CEOs essentially, and a magazine and a laundry detergent in the local kind of supermarket. Coop is this chain of cooperatives in Switzerland. They have them in all over Europe, but this is the Swiss chain, and this is the design of the laundry powder detergent that Coop, kind of the Coop brand of it. Those are the old packaging, and those are the new ones that they're replacing them. They wanted to compete with the big guys. They wanted to compete with Persil, which had the biggest part of the market in Switzerland. They wanted to have something as neat, as clean looking as Persil, and what they had was not. It was very much kind of commercial art. They wanted to move it into contemporary times. So this is what he did. He conceived of this design in this very, very simple way. So there's 3 boxes of packaging, and so he just created this set of lines, these kind of undulating waves, 3 kinds, sort of with different amplitudes of these waves. So if you redraw them, so that's what I did. I just looked at them and like redrew them just to kind of try to get under the hood of there. So this is one design, and this is all 3 of them overlapped. So as you fill in the fields of color, what you notice is that the edges line up, like the lines, the wave meets at the corner, which means you can connect them across, right? Any of the 3, right? There's 3 brands that have their own packaging, but the lines connect across. And that's what the point was. It's not just the design of the packaging, right? Just the graphic thing that you slap on the cover. He's thinking of this as a product, right? So the product designers out there, he's thinking of the entire thing, right? Here's the product, here's what this looks like, but this is also how it could be displayed. Right? It's not enough to have a good-looking design. They can mess it up in the store, right? Or not so much even the fact that they mess it up, but how can you take advantage of the way that this is displayed? It's a design opportunity. It's a modernist thing. It's like, we have full control over the design language. It's not just the box, but it's also make it foolproof. So you stack these boxes any which way, and it all works. It connects. The colors change, but the waves. So you have this like window of foaming kind of water. It's great. It's like visually arresting. It tells the story. So the other thing that was, again, Gerstner couldn't leave small things to chance. So if you take the design, reduce it by a quarter, exactly quarter, move the lines, spread the lines out, fill them, connect them, and you have the side of the box, which does the same exact thing. You set the fronts or the sides, and they always work, right? You can't mess this up, right? No store could break this system, right? They could try, but they can't, right? I mean, I guess they could put it upside down, but you can't. It's just foolproof. And it's this beautiful canvas, right? You can just fill the space and do as much of this as you want. It's brilliant in its simplicity, just sheer simplicity. Product as a whole thing from the standpoint of graphic design. And that's what they did. These are photos of what it looked like in the stores. Unfortunately, in this image, they're not showing the sides, but they had these really beautiful displays. He conceived of all of this. Like he did the advertisements for it, and he did the displays. So that's great, right? Like that's amazing. So I come across this thing. Karl Gerstner had a parallel career as an artist. Most of the pioneers of Swiss graphic design were very well-established artists in their own right, mostly in the concrete art movement. But they kept things very, very separate in a way. Gerstner had like ways to connect them, but so I found this piece. It's a piece of artwork that has these moving parts, and it's framed, it's mounted. But if you bought the piece, you could dismount it and just move the layers around. You could flip things, and you would have a completely new composition. So it was like mutable artwork. So just rearranging things, you would have this different interior space, right? Awesome. So I'm looking at this, and there's something that like clicked. It's like, that looked a little similar. So then I saw the way that artwork was conceived of. It's Gerstner. a circle with other circles, with other circles, with other circles, filling the space. It's like the square within the square. Same principle, right? So when you start filling in the overlaps, you get this permutation of these shapes. It's just a matter of how you connect, and you use the edges. So this is how he conceived of these modular elements and like created these interesting shapes and then collapsed them, cut them, collapsed them, and you have this artwork that could kind of have these things. But it's exactly the same thing he did here, right? I don't have the actual proof, like I don't have the drawings for that, but it's exactly how he conceived of these waves. He just created the structure and then like made these concentric circles and found where they would overlap and created these forms. It's that simple, right? He's so thorough. He's so thorough. It's incredible. We can use this, right? It's not just, visually it's interesting, but again, we can move aside from that and we can kind of take heart in the way that this is thought out and the way that he's conceiving of the implications of this. He's thinking of the long game in all of this. So the takeaway. I work at the Lubalin Center, and we have been collecting this material, preserving this material. It's very similar to Letterform Archive. So if you're in New York, do visit Letterform Archive in San Francisco. If you're in New York, do visit us. We have an open collection. You can browse through these things. So the more we've been doing, we've been thinking about ways to kind of connect this in the way that I'm presenting this. So I met Anton Herasimenko, who's here in the audience. Anton, who has a project called ReadyMag, and we had a short chat, actually probably a couple-hour chat, and then within 2 weeks we built this platform, built on the platform of ReadyMag called Flatfile. So there's a Flatfile, if you're not familiar. That's the Flatfile. And so what we did is we wanted to contextualize some of this stuff, and so taking objects from the collection and try to write about them in a way that makes sense and makes them more relevant to contemporary graphic designers. So we have this ongoing thing that we're trying to keep up with, putting out content that's interesting and relevant to designers. This is a way that we kind of feel giving back. If I have this interest in some of this material and I have the time to spend and find these good things about this work and how it can be relevant to all of you guys and the kind of greater community out there, we're trying to push this out there and make this available. So there's the Teddy Mat packaging is on there. This is another piece of Lubalin's work. But you can do it on your own. All it takes is just a little bit of investigation, a little bit of time with these objects. A lot of the stuff that I'm talking about, I learned just by spending time with these pieces. And you can too. For $4, $3. You can as well. So thank you for your time.